Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video, I'll be doing a bit of a different type of casting video. In this video, I'll be recasting the cast of Survivor Game Changers. Now, obviously, Survivor Game Changers is a cast that, well, isn't full of game changers. That was one of the biggest complaints of the season, was that it just felt like a random mix of people, and the Game Changers name was kind of just tacked onto it. So with this video, we're going to make a true cast of Game Changers. So how we're going to do this, we're going to go through every single person on the Survivor Game Changers cast and talk about whether or not I think they're a game changer, and if they're not, talk about who I would replace them with. Now, we will be going through the cast in the order of their boots. So let's start off with Sierra Easton, the first boot of Survivor Game Changers. And I think there's a serious debate for her being a game changer. I think it's close enough that I would say that she belongs on this cast. She is someone that kind of started this big move era. I mean, I think she gets a bit too much credit for the rock draw, as I do believe that Hayden should get more credit for getting that rock draw that happened than Sierra. But I do think she's the one that's gotten the credit since then, and with her constant talk of big moves, big moves, big moves, I do think she is someone that did change the game for those next few seasons. So because of that, I do think she was worthy of being on the Game Changers cast. The second boot of the season was Tony, and I think Tony is another one that I would say is a legitimate game changer. I mean, Tony's another big player in the big move sort of era of Survivor, and he had some really spastic gameplay that I do feel like people took to heart. And we had people like Natalie Anderson and Mike Holloway who looked at Tony as inspiration for their games. Now we have that, and also a lot of innovative moves that he was able to do. He pulled off lies about his idols. He created the Spy Shack. He just did a whole bunch of unique things on Kage-Ya, and I feel like his spot on Game Changers was definitely warranted. Now we're moving on to the third boot, which was Caleb. Obviously, he's not a game changer. The question is, who do we replace him with? And I had a couple contenders. I mean, I considered Hayden. As I mentioned before, I do think Hayden is someone that doesn't get enough credit for being a game changer, in the sense that he was the main factor behind that rock draw. However, the reason I don't put him on the cast here is because I think Sierra gets a lot of that credit nowadays. And because Sierra gets that credit, I feel like it's kind of weird to also put Hayden on the cast. There were a couple other people. I mean, to be fair, like, this is kind of an arbitrary thing of who I considered specifically for Caleb, as really just any sort of athletic male could have fit in this spot. Someone like a Tom Wesson would have been a good spot here. But the person I did end up going with is Jeremy. And I think Jeremy is someone that I can make a legitimate argument for him being a game changer even after just Survivor Cambodia. I think he was obviously kind of this alpha male dominant player, but he was also one that used meat shields. And I feel like that's something that is definitely becoming more of a staple on Survivor, is the use of meat shields, building alliances of people that you know will actively become targeted before you do. And that's a strategy that Jeremy really executed in Survivor Cambodia with people like Savage, people like Joe, even people like Fishback. And while this might not be intentional, I do think Jeremy also started this idea of revealing personal life information at Final Tribal, where he reveals that Val is pregnant at his Final Tribal, and that does end up garnering him the votes of someone like Sierra. And I do think this is something that Adam Klein used later in Millennials vs. Gen X. So I do think there is a claim for Jeremy being a game changer, so I did put him on this cast. Next up, we got Malcolm. And Malcolm is someone I would put on Game Changers. Again, I think he is someone that, again, started this big move era of Survivor. I think really he is the start of the big move era of Survivor with his Three Amigos tribal. I think that's one of the first live tribals in the history of Survivor. I think that move alone puts him as a game changer, but he also has some other interesting moves as well, with him convincing Reynolds to hand him the idol at tribal. That's a really fun move. We also have him being one of the first, like, sort of golden boy sort of guys, someone like an Ozzy, someone like a Joe, but someone that was very strategic in the game. Someone that was able to play the game extremely well, to where if he got to the end, he would have won, was one challenge away from doing that. So overall, I do think Malcolm is a game changer, and I think he fits on this cast. Now we're up to JT, and JT is a tough one. I really didn't know what to do with JT. The thing is, JT is obviously a fantastic player, at least on his first season. He played the game very well. He was the first person to have a truly perfect game. However, I don't know how game-changing that is. Again, when I think of game changers, I think of people doing things that end up affecting future seasons. And I don't know how much of JT's perfect game really affected people in the future. I don't know. I just didn't feel like JT was that much of a game changer, as I feel like a lot of the stuff that he did was done previously. So because of that, I didn't end up putting JT on this cast. So who do I replace him with? There were a couple candidates here. I thought about Mike Holloway being the first person to ever win out in Survivor, essentially winning 5 of the last 6 challenges and also needing an idol. But the thing about Mike is that I feel like there's already another person that's on this list for challenge wins. So because of that, I decided to leave Mike off as well. So the person I did end up replacing JT with was Ethan. I feel like what Ethan did was kind of what JT did later, which is play like the nice guy, the nice, likable guy that was able to get the final tribal council and pretty much won solely on his likability. Also, Ethan kind of pioneers the strategy of being the second in command to a dominant player after he was pretty much the second in command to Lex. And I think this is also the precipice for the meat shield strategy that Jeremy ends up executing later. I don't know how intentional it really was for Ethan, as Ethan did intend on going to the end of Lex, but it is still the first time that this concept really came up. So because of that, I decided to put Ethan on this Game Changer cast over JT. Now for Sandra. This is the thing about Sandra. Obviously, is the 2-time winner of Survivor. I think she has this anybody but me strategy that she keeps on talking about, even though I don't think she really lives up to it, but whatever, that's for another video. But I think it's very clear that, yeah, she did very much influence the game. I think she's definitely someone that people look back on and try to use her strategies in their games. Like a lot of people keep on mentioning anybody but me in the pregame. I think she's very clearly a game changer. The only thing that might have kept her off for me is Vesepia. And the only reason for that is because Vesepia was kind of the first of these sort of under the radar female players to end up winning the game. I feel like it's kind of a mold that Sandra ends up playing as well, though to be honest, I think Vesepia plays it better. But then again, also Vesepia is a worse character, and I don't think many people remember Vesepia nowadays. So I do think Sandra is overall the bigger game changer out of the two. So Sandra is obviously on the cast. Now for Jeff Varner. Obviously Jeff Varner is not a game changer. I mean, I think we can make that very clear. The question is who replaces him, and it really came down to 2 people for me. It came down to Todd, who I would have loved to put on here. Again, I just don't know how inspired people were by Todd in the future, so that was a major factor why he didn't make this cut. Who I did end up putting on was Richard Hatch. Again, I think there's no question that Richard Hatch. I mean, the thing is, though, I do think he gets too much credit for creating the alliance. I mean, because it is shown that Stacy and Kelly Wigglesworth create the first alliance in Survivor history. But I still think, obviously, nowadays, Hatch gets the credit for that. And obviously, Richard Hatch winning Survivor in that first season definitely demonstrated how Survivor was more of a social and strategic game than it was a physical game. So because of that, I think Richard Hatch easily makes the cut here. Now for Haley. And the interesting thing about Haley is I do think now there are people that are like saying that, oh, I'm going to strip to show you I don't have the idol and that sort of stuff. And that's something that Haley did for the first time during Survivor Game Changers. However, obviously at the time, she wasn't a game changer. And even then, it's really not that big of a thing to put her on the cast solely for. So because of that, I think the easy replacement here is Parvati. Obviously, Parvati is a big game changer. First of these sort of flirty, strategically and socially savvy women to dominate the game. Now, I do think Julie Berry was really the first one of these sort of people. But considering the fact that obviously Julie Berry's never coming back to Survivor, and also the fact that she's not really greatly remembered nowadays for that. While Parvati makes the cast here. Obviously also a game changer in the fact that she was the first person to use 2 idols at a tribal council. One of only a few people to make it to Final Tribal Council twice, has won a season, come in second another season. I mean, I think it's very, very clear that Parvati is a game changer, so obviously she's here. Now for Ozzy, and I really debated this one. When I was going through this cast, I really left it open for Ozzy to be replaced. But I just didn't really find a solid replacement. Again, I think one of the bigger ones would have been Mike Holloway or Tom Westman. But again, I felt like Tom, again, not in the greatest physical shape to be on the cast anymore. And Mike Holloway, someone that, while he did actually succeed in what Ozzy couldn't, I do think Ozzy was like the first of these sort of physical players to where people were in awe of how good he was in challenges. I mean, he won 5 out of 6 immunity challenges in Survivor Cook Islands. That's completely ridiculous. I mean, he is a physical specimen, and that is something that I do think people remember him by, and that is something that I do think people try to emulate when they talk about being good at challenges. They talk about Ozzy. So while I never wanted to see Ozzy ever play again, I do think think he was a good fit for Survivor Game Changers. Now moving on to Debbie. And Debbie was a tough one. I'm not a tough one in the sense that she's a game changer, more so a tough one who replaces her. Obviously trying to find a sort of like older female sort of archetype. And there were a couple candidates here. I think the big ones for me were Tina Wesson, obviously the first female Survivor winner. And I didn't put her in this spot. However, the person I did put on here was Kathy from Survivor Marquesas, Kathy Vavick O'Brien. And I love Kathy. I think Kathy is a fantastic character, but also a fantastic player. This is something else I debated on, was who do I give the credit for to flip at the final 9? Do I give it to Nalia or do I give it to Kathy? And while I do think they both have pretty close to shared credit for that move, which was obviously such an influential move in the history of Survivor, being the first time a flip happens in the game, I do also think that Kathy has other moves that are game-changing that made me put her on the cast over someone like a Nalia. Or Kathy also has the move at the final 4, where she makes the deal with Vecepia in the middle of Tribal, which is something that had never been done at that point, and then ends up going to Rocks because of it. I think that's another like fantastic move. I do think she's a fantastic player. She's a really dynamic player, someone who is willing to flip alliances, which wasn't really that common back then. So I do think Kathy makes the cut here over Debbie. Now for Zeke, and Zeke is not a game changer. I can't think of a single thing that Zeke did in Millennials vs. Jax that really changed the game. I do think he had a different outlook on the game, and maybe that's something, but obviously like there wasn't enough time to really change the game by the time of Survivor Game Changers, so I'm not putting Zeke on. The person I did put on the cast here was Rob Cesternino, and I think Rob Cesternino is obviously a very clear game changer, being one of the first people to play a very fluid game where he flipped back and forth between alliances, first voting out Dina, then switching into voting out Alex, switching to vote out Christy, switching to vote out Heidi. He moved back and forth throughout the game, and that is something that obviously becomes very influential in the history of Survivor now, especially with people like Johnny Fairplay, who directly emulated his game the very next season. So again, I think Rob Cesternino is the first player to ever play this dynamic of a game, so he easily makes the cut here. Now for Ciara Dawn Thomas, I mean, obviously she's not a game changer. She isn't even supposed to be on the cast. So because of that, I decided to give her spot to the person who was supposed to be on the cast, which is Natalie Anderson. And I debated on this because, like, is Natalie Anderson a game changer? And I really don't know. Obviously, she's a fantastic player, but I will give her credit for certain things here. I will give her credit for being a kind of under-the-radar dominant player, which is a really strange thing to say, but it's like she was someone that made moves round after round after round, but the positioning to become the top of her alliance, but actively didn't become the top of her alliance. She was someone that, again, she had the numbers over John Mish at a couple rounds in the game and could have easily gotten rid of him, but actively decided not to until it was the right time, which was at the final 6. And she was still allowing John Mish to think he was running the alliance when really she had the numbers the entire time to get rid of him. Again, how game-changing is this? I don't really know. But I also think she's just all around a great player, obviously a great physical player, great social player, great strategic player. I decided to put her on the cast here anyway. Now for Andrea, and Andrea is not a game changer, right? I mean, like, the thing about Andrea is that, again, I think she's a very solid player all around. I mean, she's kind of just there in Survivor history to me. So obviously I had to go ahead and pick someone else. There were a couple people I considered here. I did consider Amanda, and the same thing goes for Kelly Wentworth. And to be honest, I think there's a debate for her being on the cast, but really there was another person that I thought was in a similar archetype that I do think is very clearly a game changer I did put in here, and that is Kim Spradlin. I think Kim Spradlin's very clearly a game changer. Obviously, really the first extremely dominant female win. Again, in my opinion, the best winner of Survivor ever, one of the best players to ever play Survivor. And I do think she also gets a lot of credit nowadays for being like one of these people that built their alliance right at the beginning. That is something that did get mentioned in the pregame of even like Survivor 39. I feel like that's something that a lot of people try to do nowadays, is build an alliance right off the bat. And I feel like that's something that I can give Kim some sort of credit for. I do think she's more of a game changer than some of the other people I talked about. Now for Michaela. And Michaela's a tough one because I didn't know who to really replace her with. I was initially trying to go for a person of color, obviously to keep like kind of the diversity there, but I thought it was kind of a tough spot to fill. Again, I considered Vecepia, as I mentioned back with Sandra. Again, I feel like with having Sandra and Kathy here, both things that can take credit for things that Vecepia also did in her game, I feel like it's kind of tough to put Vecepia also on this cast. I did consider Stacy Kimmel. Stacy Kimmel, obviously, from Survivor Fiji, if you don't know, is the first person to introduce the idea of a safe vote in the case of an idol, in the sense that when the Four Horsemen had an idol and thinking that either Mookie or Alex were going to get the votes, Stacy was the one to bring up, why don't we vote for Edgardo? And that's what they end up doing and are able to successfully take out Edgardo there. And again, this is a strategy that's used very, very often in Modern Survivor. However, again, it's Stacy Kimmel. It's not like really a big influential person that, in the grand scheme of Survivor, not really someone that people talk about anymore. So because of that, I didn't put her on the cast. But I'm actually going to put on here someone that I talked about a bit earlier that I did initially cut, but then I decided, you know what, there's another female spot. Let's just put her on. And that is Tina Wesson. And again, Tina Wesson is the first female winner of Survivor. I do think she's someone that gets a bit undercredited with some of the moves that she was able to make in that season, where she was able to flip Colby in the pre-merge and build that 3-person alliance that ends up running the table in the game. Also, her getting rid of Jerry being one of the first times that the alliance and the post-merge kind of turned on themselves. So I think there are some things to credit to Tina. So Tina ends up making the cut here. Next up, we got Suri. And I think Suri is very clearly a game changer, kind of being the archetype of this person who got off the couch to play the game, but also she has some really integral moves for her resume. Again, the 3-2-1 vote is a very, very influential move in the history of Survivor, being the first time that it was shown that you don't need the outright majority to really win out in a vote. She also obviously pulled off a lot of innovative moves in Survivor Micronesia, where she was able to pull off the Eric boot, where she gets Natalie to convince Eric to give his immunity necklace to her, which is just completely ridiculous. Again, I just think that Suri's resume is definitely there, and it's something that very clearly makes her a solid candidate for this Game Changers cast. Now for Aubrey, and I debated on this one. While I think initially the thought is she's not a game changer at the time of Survivor Game Changers, I do think she is. And the main reason, this is the main reason why I would put her on the cast, is because her not winning Co-Wrong literally got Jeff Probst to change up the final tribal format for Survivor Game Changers. And I think if that's not game changing, then what is? I mean, she literally got the production to change the game because of something that happened to her. And I think that's enough for Aubrey to be on this cast. I mean, obviously, Aubrey is a good player. She played very well at points in Co-Wrong, especially towards the end game. I think she played particularly well. But it's really like the changing of the final tribal format that really makes me put her on this Game Changers cast. So she is here. Next up, we got Ty, and Ty is someone that I kind of considered, though, to be honest, I consider him more of a game changer now for his gameplay in Game Changers itself than his actual original season. So because of that, I didn't put Ty on the cast. The question is, who replaces him? And there were a couple people that I considered here. I think Cowboy was someone that I would have loved to play on the cast, but kind of similar to Stacy Kimmel. No one's really talking about Cowboy nowadays. If you don't know, during Survivor Cook Islands, he is the first person to create the plan of the split vote. Obviously, this is something that's used on pretty much every season since. I mean, it's a very influential move in the history of Survivor, where you split the votes in case of an idol. Person I did put on the cast, though, was Yau-Man. And Yau-Man's someone that doesn't want to play Survivor again. I think that's a shame. But again, I just think that he has some very solid, influential moves in the history of Survivor. I think he is someone that really changed the way people look at reward challenges, where he started using reward challenges as sort of negotiations, where he was able to obviously make the deal of dreams, which theoretically would have gave him safety at the Final Four. Obviously, it doesn't work out that way, but it's still something that I think a lot of players are thinking about more often now, of how they can use a reward to their strategic benefit. Also, the fact that he was also the first person to successfully use an idol, where he was able to suss out during Tribal that his alliance had flipped on him and successfully played the idol on himself. So I do think there are things I can say about Yau-Man that are game-changing, so because of that, he makes the cut. Alright, so now for Troyzan. Troyzan, I mean, to be honest, Troyzan and Brad we kind of mixed together, as I feel like they're kind of similar archetypes. But again, there were a lot of contenders here for who could replace this again, kind of just looking for any sort of alpha male. So the contenders here, Colby obviously won the first like physical challenge beast in Survivor history. Also kind of like the first hero in Survivor history. But again, I kind of put Ethan on the cast. I didn't feel like we needed both Ethan and Colby. Brian Heidick is someone that I thought about putting on the cast. Obviously a big innovator in how to dominate the game, being the first dominant winner of Survivor. I didn't end up putting him on. I think the main reason there is I think what he has done for the game of Survivor, the credit for that has kind of been given to someone else. And we'll talk about that player a bit later. But the people that I did end up putting on the cast over Troy and Brad are Russell Hantz and Boston Rob. Russell Hantz is probably one of the biggest game changers in the history of Survivor. I mean, obviously, he's the first person to find idols without clues. He strategically dominated his seasons, 2 seasons back to back. First person to make a really ballsy move in giving their idol to another player, where he ends up saving Parvati and Tyson ends up going out there. And I think he's also someone that was able to manipulate the other tribe in Survivor Heroes vs. Villains, where he was able to convince people like JT that there was an all-female alliance happening. And Russell really played into that, both at challenges and also by voting out people like Coach. So again, I think Russell Hantz is very clearly a game changer. There's really no debate for that. Boston Rob's a bit tougher, and the reason why I'm putting Boston Rob on here is, again, I think he gets a lot of the credit that Brian Heidick deserves. I think Brian Heidick was obviously the first player to dominate the game, but I feel like a lot of that credit goes to Boston Rob now. I feel like whenever people talk about dominant winners of Survivor, they talk about how Boston Rob dominated Redemption Island, and even people like mention All-Stars as well. He's obviously one of the biggest names in the history of Survivor at this point. I think he's really become the staple of, like, being the leader of an alliance, and because I think he deserves a spot on Game Changers, even though someone like Brian Heidick probably did it before him. Rob is also the orchestrator of the Hunter Boot, which was the first time this sort of alpha male leader gets taken out on their initial tribe so early in the season. So I think because of that, Boston Rob does fit on this Game Changers cast. For the final spot here, we have Sarila Cena, who I think is pretty clearly not a game changer, right? At that point, I think nowadays, I think there's a debate for it. At the time, definitely not. So who replaces her? And this was tough. This was actually really tough for me. I didn't know who to really put. I considered Jerry, obviously one of the first villainesses of Survivor. Again, I just don't know how game-changing she is. I don't know how many people are looking at Jerry and thinking, you know what, that's how I need to play this game. I really consider Stephanie LaGrossa. I almost put her on. I think Stephanie LaGrossa, again, I don't know how influential of a game she really played. She is someone that a lot of people mention in their Survivors You're Most Liked in the pregame. I thought that was almost enough to put her on the cast. But again, I just don't feel like there's anything she actually did in the game that actually influenced the game in the future. So the person I did put on the cast here might be a bit of a controversial pick, and to be honest, I'm still not super solid on this pick, but it is who I did end up putting on, and that is Amy Cusick. And Amy Cusick is the first leader of a all-female alliance in the history of Survivor, which has happened multiple times after this, obviously both with Parvati and with Kim. But Amy was able to keep this all-woman alliance together for a good chunk of time. Obviously it broke apart the final 7. She was the ringleader of it. She was the person out in front, and I feel like that is enough to make her a game changer for me. And a tough thing for me was that, again, Amy's someone that isn't really mentioned that much anymore, and that's kind of my biggest thing of, should I put her on the cast because of that? Because obviously when people think of, all-women alliances, they do think of, Parvati. But, screw it. It's my list. I want Amy Cusick back, so let's put her on. So there we go. That's essentially who I think should have been on Survivor Game Changers if it was an actual Game Changers cast. So the cast would be Sierra Easton, Tony Velachos, Jeremy Collins, Malcolm Freeberg, Ethan Zahn, Sandra Diaz-Twine, Richard Hatch, Parvati Shallow, Ozzy Lust, I forgot how you pronounce his last name, doesn't really matter, Kathy Vavrick O'Brien, Rob Cesternino, Natalie Anderson, Kim Spradlin, Tina Wesson, Suri Fields, Aubrey Bracco, Yau-Man Chan, Rob Mariano, Russell Hantz, and Amy Cusick. So that is my cast for Survivor Game Changers. I thought this was a fun idea to really do. Obviously, Game Changers is one of the most complained about all-star casts probably in the history of reality television. Probably up there with Amazing Race All-Stars too. And this isn't a super probable cast. There's people on here that wouldn't have come back for the season. Jeremy, Rob Mariano, Yau-Man, Rob Cesternino. Again, this cast was never happening, but it would have been fun if they ever did. And to be honest, I do think if they were actually going for a real Game Changers cast on Survivor Game Changers, it would have been very tough to build a cast that was actually filled with Game Changers. But then again, that's why you don't name the season Survivor Game Changers. But yeah, that's the video. That's pretty much everything I gotta say here. Thank you for watching.